let's go ahead and give you guys some background on Elisabeth and Descartes' correspondences. This is going to help with the reading quiz for sure. So let's follow along, right? So in this first letter, what I want to highlight here is that these introductory paragraphs where they're kind of complimenting each other, contextually, they're very useful to understand like what's going on here. This is not the communication between two people who disagree, right? These are the communications between two people who have something in common, which is an interest in fixing the substance dualism view that Descartes argues for in such a way that it is metaphysically and physically consistent, right, and plausible. Because what I want to point out here, if we look at some information, right, and that's why it's important to read the whole text, right here, right, and she gave comments on his work. They were friends. They worked together. A lot of Elisabeth's objections and concerns and worries that she pushes for, Descartes has to respond to and try to figure out how to deal with, and he attempts to do this in later texts. So although it may seem strange to have to read where they're going back and forth and complimenting each other, it's important to see that like they share a similar interest in protecting the substance dualism view. And beyond that, as I've said before, Descartes is really interested in maintaining relationships with wealthy, powerful people because otherwise he doesn't make money. He has no way to live, really. It's also important to note that Descartes here is kind of living his metaphysics, right? He believes that all humans are given the same type of substance from God, i.e. the mind, the soul. And this is picked up on by contemporary woman philosophers and woman thinkers as a very radical view, because he's saying that women and men are intellectually equivalent, both metaphysically and physically, like actually equivalent, and not just equivalent in the eyes of God after death or something like that. So this is the communication between two people who consider each other intellectual equals. Having said that, let's just figure out what's going on in this first letter. She's asking for a definition of the soul, okay? And she gives like these, she says, okay, I need a better definition of the soul because it's not clear to me how mind and body interact. So, okay, she accepts this. But based on Descartes' definition of body and Descartes' definition of mind, it's not clear how interaction is possible. So mind is that it's immaterial, and body is that it's material, right? And that's what this discussion about, these are the properties that are required for something to move, or move something else. And this seems to be lacking in the mind. So give me a better definition of soul, which for Descartes is the same as the mind, so that I can understand how the soul can interact with the body, and to some extent vice versa. And then Descartes responds, and he brings up this idea of primitive notions, which they haven't showed up prior to this letter for you guys, and they don't show up prior to certain texts. For instance, they're not in the Meditations, right? He just comes up with this concept now, and he says that making sense of primitive notions is how we get all knowledge. So this is just back to his foundationalism. And so he says, the soul, what we have of that is that it's a thinking thing, and what we have of the body is that it moves, and what we have of the mind and the body, the soul and the body, is their union. Those are the primitive notions we have of those things. And what he's saying is that because we confuse, the powers of one body to act on another with the powers of the soul to act on the body, and that's really just like a mistake that we make because we're not thinking carefully. That's why it seems like the only way that the soul could move the body is that it has to be material. It has to act on the body in the way a body would act on another body. And he's saying that this is just a misunderstanding. We're not thinking carefully about this union. And we're making a confusion, right? So I believe until now we have confused the notion of the power with the soul to act on the body with the power by which one body acts on another. And because we don't really understand the soul, we extend these powers to these other things, right? So we can't really, it's difficult to make sense of the soul. We have to think very carefully about it. We're not doing that. We make mistakes. We have confusions, right? It's not because we can't understand. It's just that we haven't really thought carefully about this. Now notice that's not really an answer to her question. So think about that. So if you're paying attention, that's the first 3 questions, by the way, on the quiz. All right. So then in this letter, Elisabeth is she's basically saying like, look, I get what you're saying, and maybe I can't think carefully about this stuff because I don't have a lot of time. Right? So this is what she's saying, like, yeah, I hope it's an excuse for my stupidity not being able to comprehend the idea by which we must judge how the soul can move the body. I get I have to think carefully about this because that's sort of what Descartes was saying. Like, you just have to think carefully about this. And she's like, okay, yeah, but I run into these issues and that I have a life to live. So let me try to think more carefully about this. And she says, I could more easily concede matter and extension to the soul than I could the capacity to move a body and be moved by it to an immaterial being. Okay, so it's easier for her to think of the mind as having matter, as being material, than it is for her to think that a body could be moved by an immaterial being or move an immaterial being. Why? All right, the first was achieved by being informed. It would be necessary that the spirits causing the motion were intelligent, right? So if a body could move an immaterial thing, then it seems like it would have to be informed. It would have to have ideas. And that is strange, because by definition, the body doesn't think for Descartes, right? So where does this come from? Like, where does this assumption she's making come from? Well, it comes from the idea that, like, the body being the agitator of motion. So like the body saying to the mind, move my arm and grab that glass of water. That seems like it has thought. That seems like it's informed by something like thought. That seems intelligent, and the body can't do that. So it's not like this story that Descartes is telling about the body, somehow getting an impression of thirst or something like that. She's saying, like, that's a strange story because that seems like thought, and the body can't have that, right? This by definition. Descartes says the body doesn't have thought. So she says that, he leaves room for this to be possible, but she's still not, by this I mean, this immaterial being to move a body, but she's still not sure, like, how that's possible given he's not provided an explanation for how the soul can move the body. He's just saying, it's not impossible. So she wants a little bit more, right? So I want to be clear here that she's not saying that she thinks that the mind has matter or that the body has thought. She's saying, like, look, based on your definitions, this makes more sense that the body, that the mind and our soul has extension than that the body can move the mind, or that an immaterial thing could move a body. So she's not conceding a point about, like, she's not like stating a view she holds. She's stating, like, look, based on your definitions, here's a flaw. Here's an outcome of your argument. This is a type of argument we maybe hit on a little bit, reductio ad absurdum. That's what's going on here. She's taking his conclusion, assuming it's true, or his definitions, assuming it's true, and then arguing to the conclusion, or arguing to an absurd conclusion that he wouldn't accept, which is that the mind, in this case, the soul, or mind, is material. So she's saying, like, look, based on everything that you've said, everything that you concede, you believe, you get this absurd position. You need to clarify. And then Descartes responds, and in his response, he's trying to make, again, this comparison between like, look, we have an understanding of things that occur, but we don't understand them well. So the difference between like the idea of something and knowledge, clear and certain knowledge about it, clear and certain understanding about it. That's what's going on in his response, right? And what he's saying here is like, look, there are certain things that are necessary for the mind to be the sort of substance it is, and certain things that are necessary for the body to be the sort of substance it is. So like, for instance, it's got to be a thinking thing for it to be a mind. It's got to have extension for it to be a body. So he's saying like, look, based on the fact that these are the essential properties of these substances, we can understand, we can immediately just cut off options, even if it's not obvious like how we solve these metaphysical problems. And so Elisabeth responds. She says, okay, sure, extension isn't necessary for the soul to be a thinking thing and to be the type of substance it is, but nevertheless, extension could serve a function, like some sort of role for the mind or the soul. So it's not clear to her how this story about, necessary for it to exist as it is, kind of cuts off the fact that it could have extension, that the soul have extension, right? And so what's going on is this dialectical back and forth where Elisabeth is saying, okay, say everything that you've claimed is true. I like this view because I want to be a substance dualist. I too would like the soul to persist after death and be distinct from the body in a particular way. So let's try to fix this view, because if we take everything you say and apply it to your if we take all your definitions and apply it to the mind and the soul and our impressions of the union between the mind and the soul, the mind and the body, what we end up with is a lot of absurdities that you refuse to accept. Please clarify. And Descartes just doesn't really do a good job of that, at least according to Elisabeth.